There, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to basic, basic research methods in political science. Okay, basic methods of political science, kind of thing. We're looking at Van Evera's little in the book, the a guide to methods for students of political science. Today, we're starting chapter two. And today's theme is case methods, case studies methods. What are they, right? What are case studies and how they should be performed? We should be looking at basically pages 49 through 55, so it's not going to be that big today. Um, at a large literature on case study methods have appeared in recent years. Right? This is his footnote, and there's a good survey of case studies. David Collier's comparative method in the volume Political Science, the State of Discipline, second edition in 93. Um, uh, Landmark writings on case study methods include Alexander George and Timothy McMahon, Case Studies in Theory, Organization, Decision Making, in that book, and Angell Lapard's Comparative Politics and Comparative Method in the 1971 edition, Hal Jacobson's Case Studies in Theory of Political Science, and the Handbook of Political Science by Greenstein and Polsny. And also volumes, and also in Strategies of Inquiry, right? Um, Robert Yin's Case Study Research Design and Methods, Sage Edition. A more developed in discussion is by George is Alexander L. George's Case Studies and Theory Development, a paper presented in the second annual conference of Information Processing Organization, Carnegie Mellon, right, this year. You can probably find it online, right? An earlier statement is Alexander George's Case Studies and Theory Development. The method of structured focus comparison in his book, in Lauren's book, edited book, Diplomacy, New Approaches in History, Theory, and Policy. Additional work and case studies are listed in the biography of Van Evera's book. So he says, in recent years, but the literature remains still sparse, he says. No complete category of research design for case study has emerged, right? And this is Yin case study. This is what Yin and case study research says, right? No textbook covers the gauntlet of study design consideration, right? Three. And he goes, usual steps towards such a text are Yin's case studies research and famous, King, King Cohane Verba's Designing Social Inquiry by Princeton. I always It was the Bible in political science. I was there when I was to get my doctorate. Just before getting my doctorate, and even after my doctorate, this was and it still remains the kind of Bible for qualitative methods, right? In other words, scientific inference and qualitative research, right? So this was the merging of how to engage in qualitative research that's still nevertheless empirical, all right? Because this was always the case that we used to say, well, empirical is quantitative, and you know, whereas qualitative research was just basically subjective, fuzzy thinking. No, this was the difference. This is what King, Cohane, and Verba in designing social inquiry was trying to do, to point out the empirical verification, empirical methods still held true even to qualitative research, and they offered this. Now, even Van Evera earlier last section kind of points out that these guys were too strict. They were overly things about this, and they exaggerate too far for harder methods. Okay, for statistical approaches that you don't necessarily have to go to, because so I understand why, particularly King and Cohane, not so much Cohane, but mostly King, I think, in that sense, was pushing towards more harder methods in that sense. But let's go back. Um, there is no soup to nut cookbook on case methods for beginners practitioners, and many texts on social science methodologies slight or omit the case studies method. Now, this is something true, but he makes the point about this. He says, uh, um, Babel mentions case studies once. In other words, this is Simon and Bernstein give case study methods 2 pages mention. Bailey has 3 pages to touch the subject. Dooley has the chapter on qualitative research, but no direct mention of case studies. Right, that's the whole problem. Accordingly, the following chapter distills, elaborates, and qualifies the observations of the existing literature. I focus on asserting that case assessing. I focus on assessing the case study and offer practitioners how to do it, advice for beginners doing case studies. So therefore, this is he's going to be doing here. Okay, the focus of what he's going to do is one is assessing the case study advice methods, right, and then offering practical how to do it advice for beginners. Okay, so let's do case studies in perspective. As I said in chapter 1, we have 2 basic ways of testing theories: experimental and observation. Again, observational test in in 2 varieties, large N and case studies. Thus, overall, we have a universe of 3 basic testing methods: experimental observation using large N, large number case statistical analysis, which tends to be statistical, right? And observation using case study analysis. Which method is best? Is case study inferior to the other methods? Social science have long considered case studies the weakest of the 3 testing methods for 2 reasons. Okay, now before he does this, he says, and he's going to give the example. Yin, who notes the traditional prejudices against case study strategy and the disdain for case study strategy held by many researchers. As Yin notes further, text on social science methodology reflects the disdain by neglecting or omitting the case study method. Most social science textbooks have failed to consider the case study method a formal research strategy at all. Randy Stocker likewise notes the disrepute of case studies among sociologists who see the case study as barely better than journalism, right? This is the attitude in that sense. So there's 2 reasons, he's saying. First, some argue that case studies provide the least opportunities for to control for the effects of perturbing third variables, right? So you don't know. This is the first criticism, right? This is that it doesn't have the ability to control for third. In this view, experiments are the best method. Investigator eliminates the possible effects of omitted variables by exposing the group to only one stimulus while holding the others constant. Right? That's the classic argument that experimental is the best. If you want to control for third variables, experimentation is the best, right? Large N analysis is next best, but the investigator can run partial correlations to control the effect of specific omitted variables and can rely on randomization effects of examining many cases to reduce the effects of other omitted variables. Studies of one or few cases are worst because the data is unrandomized and correlations are infeasible since data points are too few. Right? This is, in other words, this is advanced Lipset and Smeltzer advanced this view. Lipset and computer. Again, this is like this at Horde. And he goes. He gets here to Collier's method summarized Lipset. See Campbell's and Stanley, who claim that a single case study are of almost no scientific value. But see further Campbell later retraction, degrees of freedom in case studies, right? He retracts it. So this is like, okay, right? This is so, okay. This criticism of case studies is unfair, however. So this is an argument. Case studies offer 2 fairly strong methods for controlling the impact of omitted variables, right? He says this is unfair. They argue that case studies can't do this. In other words, the argument is experiment's best, large N is second best, because large N we can have randomized variables. We can correlate, use correlations of other things to find, to find whether something has a stronger possibility, right? In other words, we can run partial correlations to control the effects of specific omitted variables, right? And can rely on randomization, he says, right? But he says that this criticism of it is unfair. Case studies, he says, offer two fairly strong methods of controlling the impact of limited variables. First, test the predictions within case variance. That is test using multiple congruence procedures, and this is 8. In multiple congruence procedures, the investigator explores the case looking for congruence or incongruence. Now, congruence means places that coming together, and incongruence separation, right? Between observed and predicted values. So therefore, do they come together and they correlate, or do they lack correlation and they separate from each other, not occur? In other words, on predicted values, right? On the several or more measures of the independent or dependent variable of the test hypothesis, right? See the discussion of congruence procedure in the next section of this chapter. To test a theory fully, one would look for congruence or incongruence between values of independent and dependent variables, between independent and intervening variables, and between intervening variables, if there are several, and on between the intervening and dependent variables, right? This is the congruence, that is the procedures of congruence. So there are mechanisms of doing this, he said, right? So using this, in other words, the first test is variance. That is test using multiple congruence procedure or process tracing methodology. 9.9 is process tracing. On process tracing, see George and McCone case studies and theorems. George, case studies and development, and the discussion of process tracing in that section. George and McCone uses process tracing to refer to tracing of the decision process by which various initial conditions are translated into outcomes. I use the term more broadly to refer to the tracing of any causal process by which initial conditions are translated into outcomes. Thus, my definition includes tracing both of decision processes and causal processes that do not involve decisions. In other words, it's like this. He says that the traditional way of process tracing is usually decision trees, decisions, right? Now how he's using it, whenever he's using it, is more broadly. So it doesn't necessarily require decision. Rather, it's a stage of a process of causality, right? Um, um, we might reserve decision process tracing to capture George and Renault's narrow meaning, right? It's more narrow. George Renault's understanding is narrow decision process tracing, but he's more concluding of this. His is whenever his idea does not in other words, his definition includes tracing both of decision process and causal processes that do not involve decision. Okay, let's go back. So therefore, multi-congruence procedures and process tracing methodology gain strong controls for the uniform character and background conditions of the case. Now 10. Footnote 10, noting the controls that congruence procedure and process tracing allows, and referring to them jointly as pattern matching is Campbell, right? So therefore, Campbell argues about pattern matching. Okay, this is this idea. As long as you have pattern matching, case studies allow for this, right? Most cases offer a background drop or setting, right, of a fairly uniform case conditions, and many cases allow for a number of observations of values on the independent variable IV and the dependent variable DV. If case conditions are uniform, we can account third variable influence in a cause of an observed within case covariance. Means something that comes between the values of the something. Okay, something that covays. Okay, I think yeah. Hold on. Okay, let me get what covariance mean here. In probability theory and statistics, covariance is the measure of the joint variability of two random variables. In other words, how they vary, variability, how they differ to it. If 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 the greater values of one variable mainly corresponds with the greater values in the other, and the same holds true for lesser variables. Covariance is positive, and the other situation, and then if it doesn't hold, then it's negative, right? So therefore, that's what covariance means in that sense. Um, it's not a big thing. I just wanted to highlight what this meant, because the clear terms of here. So that within case covariance, in the situation where there's clear sense between these, the uniform background conditions, he's saying, this is the clause, the uniform background conditions of the case creates a semi-controlled environment that limits the effects of third variables by holding them constant, right? They're constant in that sense. Chapter note 11. This logic applies to the analysis of any hypothesized causal relationship between an IV, the NV, the NV, the NV, or the NV or DV, as well as the IV and the DV. So therefore, this background case, they're consistent. In other words, they're consistent. The background case is a consistent thing, and therefore you can control that. We need to do this inherent in case. Uh, but he says that we can do what we can observe observe the values of independent variable and dependent variables, right? Observations of this. We can do, if the conditions are uniform, we can discount this, he says. So we use the procedures within case, right? Second, that's the first question of how we solve it. Second defense, we can control the effect of first omitted variables by selecting for the case studies of extreme or high-low values on the study variable. So therefore, we can control it by high or low variable. This lowers the number of third factors with the strength to produce results that the test theory predicts, which lowers the possibility of omitted variables account for the past test, right? On this technique, see the discussion of congruence procedure type 1 in the next section of the chapter. A third means of omitted variable control is in case studies is found in methods of controlled comparison using John Stuart Mill's method of difference. But this is a fairly weak tool. See the discussion of controlled comparisons in the next chapters, the next section of the chapter. So he's going to be doing that next, right? So therefore, this is how we address it. The second criticism of case study. So this is the second criticism, right? Is that the case study result cannot be generalized to other cases, has more merit, but applies only to single case studies, right? A single case study is a poor laboratory for identifying a theory's antecedent condition, background conditions that activate or magnify its action. 13. The process of defining and measuring the prevalence of antecedent conditions is often remaining to the testing of a theory's external validity, meaning establishing the domain to which a theory can be generalized. Yin, right? Test for external validity contrasts with tests for internal validity, which address the capacity of the theory to explain a given case, right? See, for example, Yin and Collier, right? I avoid these binary categories because they omit an important third type of validity, the ability of a theory to pass tests within a given case. Right, so therefore, this idea, he thinks that this binary idea misses the point because it fails to examine the ability to pass a test and the strength of testing, right? He goes, a single case of poor laboratory for identifying theory antecedent conditions, background conditions that activate and magnify its action, because, as noted above, most cases provide a backdrop of fairly uniform conditions. This uniformity masks the action of antecedent conditions that theory requires. Since the antecedent condition does not vary, hence it causes no telltale variance on the dependent variable. Thus, a theory that passes a single case study test with flying colors may require rare antecedent conditions and hence have little explanatory range, right? 14, we talk about this. Explanatory range was discussed in the theory's explanation power in the first chapter, right? That makes good theory, right? But the weakness can remain hidden from the investigator who studies only one or two cases. Thus, a strength of case study method is also a weakness. Right? The uniformity of case background condition controls the effects of third variables, but it masks antecedent conditions. The identity and importance of antecedent conditions emerge more clearly from large N studies, large case studies. In large N studies, cases that lack these antecedent conditions emerge as outliers that exhibit the theory's cause without its predictive outcome. The existence of outliers signals that the theory needs special conditions to operate. Studies of these outliers can identify these conditions. The study of a single case offers no parallel method of covering antecedent conditions. However, these antecedent conditions can be uncovered by doing more case studies. So the weakness of case studies is repairable. So look at 15. He says methods of inferring and testing antecedent conditions with case studies are discussed in this chapter, right? The case study the case study methods has two strengths that offsets this weakness. So this is yes, this is a weakness. The second criticism, the first criticism was unfair. The second criticism is valid, but it's not unsolvable. It can be fixed. And he says, but then at the same time, even if we admit that weakness, right? It has two strengths that offset this weakness. First, tests performed with case studies are often stronger because the prediction testers are quite unique. These predictions are not made by the other known theories, right? See, as noted in chapter 1, a test is strong if it evaluates a unique prediction, a forecast not made by other known theories, because this prediction's fulfillment cannot be explained except by the theory's action, right? Tests are also strong if they evaluate certain predictions. Forecasts that are unequivocal must occur if the theory is valid. On strong and weak tests, see strong and weak tests in chapter 1, and the section strong versus weak in this chapter, right? This is what we said about this, right? Okay. Specifically, case studies allowed the test of prediction about private speech and writings of policy actors, right? This allows predictions of this, right? These predictions are singular to the theory that makes them. No other theory predicts the same thought or statement. The confirmation of such predictions strongly correlate the test theory. Case studies are the best format to capturing such evidence. Hence, case studies can supply quite decisive evidence for or against political theories, ideas, theories. Okay? Often, this evidence is more decisive than in large N evidence. So, therefore, it can do it twice against. In other words, it offers tests testing stronger tests that confirm or invalidate a theory, and this evidence is more decisive than large N evidence. Second, inferring and testing explanations that define how the independent causes and dependent variables are often easier with case studies than large N methods. If case study evidence supports a hypothesis, the investigator can explore the case further to deduce and test explanations detailing the process of the hypothesis. More important, one can process trace, that is, examine the process whereby initial case conditions are translated into case outcomes. How does a theory work? Process tracing can tell us. Congruence procedures can also illuminate explanations. More on process tracing and congruence procedures below. Both procedures are fairly easy to perform after a case has been initially studied because the background and spade work on the case, establishing the case background and chronology, and so on, has been already done. In contrast, a large N test of a hypothesis provides little or no new insight on the causal process that comprises the hypothesis explanation, nor does it generate data that could be used to infer or test explanations of that process. In other words, it can't get to, it can the larger N stuff can get you the larger hypothesis, but you can't, what he says, generate the background or the chronology, right? It cannot do this kind of stuff. Nor does it generate data that could be used to infer or test explanations of that process. So you cannot get no new insight that why what what In other words, what compromises the explanation, not compromises, not compromises, comprises the hypothesis explanation, nor does it generate data that could be used to infer or test them, right? Overall, large N methods tell us more about whether hypotheses hold than why they hold, okay? In other words, at large N's talk about shows the validity, whether they by hold means their validity or invalidity, and not why they're valid or not valid. Okay. In other words, case studies say more about why they hold, why they are valid. Right. Thus, the case study is a strong method of testing theories. It is a theory valid? How does it operate? Even case even single case studies can give clear answers to these questions, right? Is a theory valid? How does it operate? They are less able to identify a theory's antecedent condition. Yes, that's true. He says, how broad is the range of the case that the theory governs? So therefore, they can't. They're less case study. Case studies say little unless several are performed. In other words, on this, how broad this is, right? They are less able to deal with antecedent conditions, as they admitted, right? But how broad this is, well, case studies say little unless many case studies are produced. Which method of inquiry, experiment, large N, or case study, is correct? Oh, is superior, not correct, superior. Which of these is the answer? Experiment, large N, or case study is superior. The answer turns on the nature of our questions and the structure of the data and the domain we study. So therefore, again, which of these is better? It depends on the nature of the question and the data and the structure of the data we're dealing with and the thing we are studying, or the domain. The domain is the field that we're dealing with. The specific, either like political science, but also what study of political science, studying of elections, studying of government, study of states at war with each other. In other words, it depends on what is the specific thing you're addressing, studying, trying to understand. Does in that domain, that area, that thing, that topic, so domain can also mean topic in the sense of topic. Does this what what about this? What is our question? What is the nature of our question? And two, the structure of data. Experiments can be best if experiments are feasible, but they seldom are feasible in such time. Large N can be best if we want to test a prime hypothesis, and if we have many well-recorded cases to study. Case studies can be best if we want to infer or test explanatory hypotheses, or if the cases have been unevenly recorded. A few are recorded in great details, many in scant details. There is no uniform answer to the questions which method is best. Okay, so again, that's how he ends it. Which of these methods is best? I'm going to stop here. This is, I think, where no. Yeah, this is where we stopped, not 59, 55. So I'm going to stop here. Next test video, we're going to be doing a testing with case studies. So if you have any comments or questions, please put it here. Say what you have issues with, which would like more clarification about, and when I see them, I will answer to them. Second is, if you like the video, like it, share it with a friend, get others to share in your social media. If you didn't like it, well, say why you didn't like it in the comments. Okay, what is the issue that you didn't like it? What issue? Okay, you can say that text is Mark. Why are you using this text? Okay, I understand. If you've not subscribed, please subscribe. I'd like to grow the channel a little more. Again, I'm doing this as kind of like I'm doing this for many reasons. One is that I think this is a very good book. I think more people should look at it and then get encouraged by it, particularly those who are studying politics. Would be useful for people who wish to engage in these things. Another thing is, if you have not, like I said, if you're not subscribed, so subscribe, right? Another thing you can do is, you can follow me on the social media links below. You can also follow my academic social media links and also find out about my research and things like that if you're interested. Another thing what you can do is you want to help me to do what I do here. Well, you can become a subscribe to our Patreon. Of course, you're saying, "Oh, but there's not many people there. Why aren't you doing this?" What? No, okay, I understand. I'm late to the game. I'm 10 years late to the game. I'm always late to the game in a sense. Um, I didn't really, I saw that it was going on. And also I'm kind of I can do some things in tech good, but I never was good at videos and things. So I'm kind of like um, I should have done that. I've been doing this kind of for 3 years, 4 years. I've been doing it regularly since I think for 2 years now. Regularly doing video. I did some videos back in 2016, but my wife was encouraging me to do it. She's a kind of marketing person. She wants me to always do this. She's an engineer. She has a background in engineering and marketing, so it's funny. She always pushes me to kind of like do things like this, but yeah, I usually spend my time reading and doing research, and and also preparing my work for teaching students and helping them do research. Um, so, if you want to help me, you can do so by Patreon or Subscribe, or you can buy one of my books below if you've not already done so. Or if you know a friend or someone like this, can buy one book. If you buy the Lulu book, it'll help me. I will get more money from it because Lulu pays me what profit that Amazon or bookstores get. Okay, that's it. I think I'm going to be doing these videos. This next time we'll look at testing theories and case studies. That's it. Take care. Bye bye. Have a good day.